407 years ago, our fathers brought forth in this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Paragraph by paragraph. Notice, Lincoln takes the founding back to July 4th, 1776. No mistake why I wore this hat. To the Declaration. Because as Lincoln said, and my successor as Dean will talk about, I think, next Thursday, as Lincoln said in 1858 speech on a Dred Scott decision. Earlier, Lincoln said, the Constitution is a picture of silver surrounding the apple of gold. An apple of gold. The Declaration is the apple of gold. The picture of silver is the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States is for the Declaration, not the Declaration for the Constitution. Keep that in mind as you serve this great country. Keep that in mind as you do serve this great country. So he goes back to the beginning of the founding generation, July 4th. Then he says, oh, and notice, conceived in liberty. The liberty was present before we were here. Conceived in a liberty that is within each one of us. That's what the world is about, Chad. The liberty is within us. We are free human beings. Conceived in liberty. It existed prior to and dedicated to the proposition. Notice, when he dedicates to the proposition, he takes what was an axiomatic principle of geometry in Jefferson's Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal. That's an axiomatic statement. No need of proof. Proposition is something that needs to be tested. Lincoln believed it, but there was a test to that proposition. Not everybody believed it, huh? Proposition in Euclid is something that needs to be demonstrated as true. And Lincoln knew his Euclid well as he mastered the first 6 or 7 books of Euclidean geometry. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come here. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that that nation may live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. Notice he used the term nation in the first paragraph and again in the second, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. What is nation? Nation is from the Latin natio, one of the many Roman expressions for people, along with vox. Natio is people assembled as a tribe, as united. Lincoln used the term. Before this war, before this speech, nation wasn't used at all. It's called the Confederacy, not Confederate States of America. The Confederacy, the Union. Now he uses it repeatedly here. We're going to dedicate, set aside a portion of that field to answer the test whether the nation can long endure, or whether the nation dedicated to that proposition will last. Huh? That's what the war is about, according to Abraham Lincoln. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we can't set aside, we can't even set aside the honor. We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, made it sacred, consecrated it, made it sacred, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Lincoln here is engaging in a rhetorical exercise that goes all the way back, at least to somewhere in Plato's Republic, in which Socrates says, all regimes are founded upon a noble lie. They're not really true, but they have a certain sacredness to them that are purported to give the regime legitimacy, argues Socrates to Glaucon and Thrasymachus, I think in Book 2 of the Republic. I don't know that Lincoln read Plato. He sure read his Shakespeare. This, you might say, is an example of a noble lie. Not that Lincoln didn't believe it. He did believe it. He's saying that for rhetorical effect, because what they did here was so great. But he sure as heck hopes that we who hear it, both today and then, remember what is said here. The deed, in a way, speaks for itself. Lincoln, with Hancock, agreed to that. Fervently agreed. But the speech gives meaning to the deed. You know what they died for here because of the way it is explained here by President Lincoln. This is why they did it. This is why Alonzo Cushing gave his last full measure of devotion, huh? Why the men of the 1st Minnesota went forward under Hancock's command. The world will little note or long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Why not? Because in large part, I think, because of what he said here and what he did with the Emancipation Proclamation, a military measure for justice, and what he said in March 4th, 1865 at the Second Inaugural. Read it. What can we do then? He's doing his duty. Not only as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, he's doing his duty here as the chief elected political officer of the United States, which it was a form of old presidential rhetoric that it's used for high purposes, not to call people stupid names in a campaign. There was some of that too. I don't think it clicks now, but no. Presidential rhetoric was chief elected political officer would espouse the values that the regime was supposed to be for. It is for us here, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the It is rather for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. We each go forward here to do our duty. Lincoln was doing his just by giving a speech, believe it or not. It is rather for us here to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us. That from these honored dead, we have increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure. They did the deed. We say the speech explaining what they did. We got to be dedicated to what I'm talking about here. He wasn't a humble man. He never said he was a humble man that I know. Except if humility is walking in the truth of who you are. He was talking in the truth of what he believed in right here and had the chance to do so, and he did it. From these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. This nation may endure. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. Shall have a new birth of freedom. There it is. This constitutes on this ground, on these grounds here, a second founding of the United States of America. A new birth of freedom. And the government of the people. By the people. For the people. Shall not perish from the earth. Or as Aristotle again put it in Book 1 of the Politics, written sometime in the 4th century BC. But a political partnership is a partnership where those rule and are ruled in turn share in rule. The government of the people, government by the people, government for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Amen. That's it. Thank you.